Everyone, we're going to give it a minute for everyone to filter in, and we'll be at the top of the hour. Okay, welcome everyone to Product Differentiation Strategies, how to build a product that sells. I'm your moderator, Caroline Schmidt. In today's webinar, we'll be talking about leveraging product differentiation to craft a unique selling point factor for your products and your brand. We'll start out with a 25-minute presentation, and then we'll host a Q&A session. So please feel free to put any questions that maybe come up during the session or as we get closer to Q&A, anything that you had to ask Neil. We'll get to as many of them as we can in that 20 minutes. Definitely want to introduce you to our expert, Neil Macqueen. He's the head of design at Gembah. He is a world-leading industrial designer with over 12 years of experience and 78 patents to his name. He spent the last 10 years at Dyson leading new product innovation teams, and he's been part of the product journey for some of the most recognizable products in the world. So I will hand it over to Neil. Thanks everyone for attending today.
Hi, it's wonderful to have you with us, and thank you for joining. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you on this subject. And it's product success through differentiation that really does drive value, not only for businesses, stakeholders, but for people. And I think that's the crux to all of this, is how do we drive success for people, which then in turn returns value for us in business. So as Carolyn alluded to, my background is with Dyson. I've spent the past 10 years and worked across a very broad expanse of their projects. I think the interesting thing in that as well, just to kind of go into a little bit of the detail there, is that successful business isn't purely from a design perspective, but from a perspective of what does that business need in terms of it being a feasible and viable idea. So, I spent a lot of my time as well seconded into Dyson's cost department, which is all about business cases, the business of design. And I think that's a really interesting mix when it comes to mixing the business of design with innovation. And I think that's where you can really harness some true success for both yourself and for your clients. As some examples of that, I can draw out, DC40, the new Dyson humidifier purifier, and the Dyson PureCool Me. So, as examples, the Dyson DC40 on the left was something I was involved with quite early in my career at Dyson. And what it did was really transform how people interacted with cleaning in their home in terms of having a multifunctional product, which both cleaned up above easily, up the stairs, and maneuverability around objects, through into the Dyson humidifier purifier. And we probably haven't got enough time today for me to go through all of the pain and heartache that product caused me in its development. And I think that's something I really want to encourage to you all, is that it's not a simple endeavor in terms of finding success with product development through differentiation. But I think there is a really logical and implementable process that you can apply to learn from failure. Failing forwards and learning from failure is how you get true product innovation and differentiation. And that's a great example of it. And in terms of the last example, and in all of these, I'm going to be running through some case studies subsequently and taking you through a bit of a toolbox of how you can apply this for yourself. But for the Dyson PureCool Me, that was a product that I drew in my book. I think it was nearly 3.5 years ago. Spoke to James about it in terms of how it differentiated the marketplace and what the opportunity was there. And I'm here today with a product which is selling millions of products. So I think that's a great case study of how do you differentiate in an existing market to include new users and new features in a way that benefits people. And that is the question. How do we benefit people? And I think how we can do that in the most obvious way is through new ideas, innovation. It's through intellectual property. And the evidence of that is how many patents you can have against that. So in terms of my experience with Dyson, I have 78 patents and designs registered against a plethora of different projects. That's just being a little smattering of examples. But again, I come to the point of how do you create success through differentiation? And that's essentially a very simple title of solving problems that others ignore. And it's in solving those problems that others ignore that you get to the heart of essentially your users' latent needs, the things that they didn't realize were frustrations in their life, but that you can provide solutions to, which help you gain market share. And that's hugely significant. And it's something which is, becomes a defensible position in terms of the intellectual property of your products. But you might ask, that's a fairly tall endeavor, even for a small to medium-sized business, to somebody who's just, a fairly young entrepreneur, all the way through to very big established global corporations, solving those problems. How do you do that? I think that's the real topic for today's discussion and how you go about that. I've tried to make this as accessible in terms of future content for you all. So you'll see some of the subsequent slides I've taken from an online resource. You'll recognize some of the slides if you then follow up with that resource. We'll be following up with you in terms of the links to that resource, so you can pick this up. But in terms of the topic of how do we do that? And, the heart of that is human-centered design. Making sure that, yes, you have to protect the interests of you as a business at the heart of what you're trying to endeavor to do, but it's people and problems that you need to design and solve for. And it's the process by which you apply to, finding those problems, talking to those people, iterating on what those ideas and solutions are that get you there. In terms of what that looks like, so, ideation, inspiration, implementation. And if you're hoping for a simple A to Z, follow these 10 steps and you will find your product success through differentiation. Unfortunately, I don't think that exists. But what does exist is a clear framework of engagement with people. And again, putting people at the center of all of this and making sure that we represent the interests of the business throughout that process. So for inspiration, immersing yourself in your market, understanding the gaps, understanding the competition. Through ideation, engaging with the people who are using those products, the people who use your products, or more interestingly, engaging with the people who don't use your products. Why not? And then implementing that through, coming up with ideas, building prototypes, and engaging. And it can be an incredibly quick and fluid process that you go through. But there are some important things to remember through all of that. And I think that this is a key thing which, even in my experience at large corporations in the past, it's easy to get, it's an enjoyable process coming up with new ideas. It's an enjoyable process investigating new markets. But making sure that at the heart of all of this, we're keeping essentially the three key fundamentals, if you like, of desirability, viability, and feasibility. A product needs to be desirable from the aspect of people want to interact with it. They want to have it in their home. They're drawn to wanting to buy it. It helps with the marketing, with desirability. Viability, is this viable? What is the net present value of my idea? It's okay if you come up with the most beautiful, elegant, exotic idea, but if it's something which you can't reconcile your margin against your volume and come out with something which, profits you as a business, it's all in vain. Likewise with feasibility, reconciling what your idea is with the viability and, what are the means open to you in terms of, is this a feasible idea for me to execute against? Or, coming up with the next great idea in terms of technology, is that executable? Is there a supplier base, in place for that? So keeping in mind that landscape of desirability, viability, and feasibility is incredibly important for all product development. Now, we mentioned product development and differentiation. What are the different types of those? And I think, here we go, the slides are just a bit delayed, but the different types of differentiation, vertical and horizontal. So this is something crucial in terms of starting out in your product development journey of, where are you? What have you already facilitated for? Are you looking to essentially vertical differentiation, where we're adding on the potential of value. You're not fundamentally changing your product, but you're wanting to gain a large percentage of margin, essentially go to a more premium offering potentially, and extend into that evolutionary SKU versus something where you're wanting to essentially broaden your user network and client base, and you want to adapt evolutionarily. I think it's also about managing your own expectations with regards to the creation of the revolutionary. Those are things which, every true entrepreneur is after, but it does take a lot of work. And I think it's about just managing your own expectations, the expectations of your shareholders, in terms of what the type of trajectory and timeline it takes to get to that. But I think in terms of e-commerce and what we can do with the here and now, managing the incremental so that you're keeping margin share, that you're gaining margin share over your competition. That's a really interesting place and something where you can act on very rapidly. So I'll quickly go into a few examples of case studies from my past at Dyson. And subsequent to that, we'll dig into this process a little bit more and hopefully make it a bit more clear and actionable. So in terms of a good example of something which was an evolutionary evolutionary incremental product development, the vacuum cleaner. James Dyson, I think it was nearly 20 years ago, came up with the cyclone technology of separating dust, and went on a product development journey of developing that product. And the true innovation there came with the advent of the ball. Now we're with stick vacuum cleaners, and that's a whole separate category now. But in terms of where we were 10 years ago, what we had essentially was this DC25. And I mention this as a particular case study because what you have probably is good enough, but it's what you need to do in terms of managing that incremental improvement of your product year on year to make sure that you're ahead with claims, you're ahead of your competition, making sure that you're essentially always delivering the best value and the best possible claims against your competition and your own product. So in this scenario, DC25, the first ball vacuum cleaner that allowed for better maneuverability and access around your home. But, and again, this was early in my career, we were getting feedback back from users to say, both the visual and also the physical interaction with the product is one which it's intimidating for people. They don't like all the ductwork. It's not very obvious where things go. And I think it's the responsibility of every product owner to listen to who uses their product. So I'll call this out as a particular example in terms of listening and engaging with your users. You can have a successful product, but it's over time then that your competition catches up, and it's making sure that you keep ahead of the competition with these things. So in this example, what we did, and again, I mentioned this in the case of defensible IP, we took all of that ductwork and took all of that feedback from the people using our current product and created a far more elegant silhouette, which was completely unobtrusive in terms of ductwork and complexity. It added to the functionality of the product in terms of going around corners and access to the home, and ended up with a product which essentially met all the user needs or the latent needs that people express to us. How did we go about that? It's through observation. It's through observation and engagement with your users. This is slightly outdated for where vacuum cleaners are today, but that again is testament to a company and to a methodology which doesn't stand still and doesn't essentially isn't complacent in terms of user needs. So for where and when this landed, it was a product which revolutionized what vacuum cleaning in the home did. It allowed you to access, on the far right, access tall corners, not done before. It improved pickup suction in terms of the incremental technology in the cleaner head, as well as spoke to the key and unique needs in the home. Have you got a pet in the home? Okay, here's a cleaner head that fixes that problem. You've got tables and obstructive objects in the home that you need to clean under. Okay, we have a solution for that. So again, I just mentioned this in terms of an example of listening to feedback and making sure that you're designing around that with an empathetic view to product development. Another example of this, and feel free to call out some questions in the chat, and I can pick up some more particular questions if anyone's interested. But I'll start with that little black and white picture in the middle, and that was the design of the fan in 1881, I believe it was. And to the left of that is something that you can buy on Amazon or any other commercial website today. And in terms of where and what that market is incredibly stagnant technology, something that moves the air, provides you cooling. And I found this picture of this first original fan. I think it was just yesterday I found that picture. I was just doing some quick research and putting together some imagery. And it was incredible to me because what it calls out is, with wire guard and switch for running fast and slow. And that was remarkably similar in my mind to what is offered still today in terms of fans operated in, low price point, but in terms of core functionality, nothing really moved forwards. Fast forward to 2009, I believe it was, Dyson again revolutionized that market with the introduction of Dyson's air multiplier, or the AMO1. And what that did again was looked into the latent needs of the users of a fan. How do you clean a fan? I have small children whose fingers fit through the wire guards. How do I operate my fan safely in the home for my child without being anxious about it? It directly spoke to those user needs, as well as adding on functionality. So, introducing air multiplier technology, coandering surfaces, which multiplied the air effect up to 15 times the original entrained amount. So when I joined that team, that was something, which was already in place, selling millions of products a year, addressing user needs, addressing what was in the market. But the question arrives again, how do I create and adapt evolutionarily to that product to add new users? What is in the marketplace? And with my existing supplier base, that existing supplier base is an invaluable resource in terms of feedback. So engage with those people, talk to them. What are their lives looking like? What are the personas? Who are you selling to? Understanding and empathizing with those needs. And what we saw there essentially was that, with the rise in pollution, with the rise in indoor living, there was a real need around, actually, this is not just a seasonal product for cooling, but there's a real need for pure air in the home on a personal level. So what we did there, and again, I mentioned this was one of my original sketches just to the right, on the left of the screen, next to the AMO1. That was one of my original sketches 3.5 years ago in terms of adapting and applying a new technology which we had developed which was air vectoring. But the true interesting thing there is, the fact that we're taking into account and empathizing with our users in terms of, I'm going to provide purified air to you in a non-seasonal way. So it's not just about providing you a cooling airstream in the summer. What about in the winter? You don't want it to be cool, you yourself to be cooled in the winter. So the air vectoring technology provided was the ability to angle the air depending on the orientation of that top dome surface. Something which essentially allows you to engage with that product and get the provided benefits in a year-round way. That landed, it's done incredibly well. And I think what it does is truly revolutionizes and adds more benefits on top of the existing platform of technology. I think that, again, I call out that feasibility, desirability, and viability, taking into account what have I already got in my locker with regards to feasibility of technologies in terms of my processes, my vendors. How can I take advantage of those things to essentially harness further market potential? So moving on, those are the case studies. And I think what I just want to encourage everybody about again is this is a journey. We refer to it at Gembah as our product development journey. And we always try to manage the expectation of our clients with regards to, it's often insight and true product differentiation comes at a bit of a low point. You have an idea, you take that idea, you prototype it, you talk to people, you get some really bad feedback. And that can be often very discouraging. But what that feedback is so invaluable in delivering is insight. And it's that insight that you can then reintegrate and introduce into your ideas that grows confidence that you're actually addressing how people want to interact with this, how they work and live with your product. And that grows confidence, and that really grows essentially the validity of your design. So in terms of, how we can introduce this into a process which you yourself can apply, I mentioned, bringing online some resources. So IDEO, if you're familiar with, they have some brilliant online resources which you can all look up later. Starting with inspiration, ideation, implementation. So I had a slide on this earlier, and this graph is depicting it, as a lateral flow, and that's true. But what, again, I just really reinforce as this can be and should be a cyclical process. The fact that your inspiration stage, you have a design challenge, for somebody who is an existing entrepreneur versus somebody who has, an existing established e-commerce business. What is your challenge, or what is your idea? How do you get started in that? How do you conduct interviews? How do you stay human-centered? I think that there's a lot of material around that, versus into ideation, coming up with further ideas, making sure that you come up with a lot, focusing them down to what are my options, and then implementing them into prototypes, quick, easy prototypes. You'd be amazed in terms of those earlier case studies I showed you at Dyson, the thing that it missed, and just due to confidentiality, I've never been able to share, but you saw a plethora of sketches. Behind each of those sketches were at least 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 prototypes. And it's not about investing heavily in prototyping, but what it's about is representing your idea accurately. And that can be done through, a plethora of different ways, loads of ways. So if we just jump into that first stage, inspiration. How might I, as an entrepreneur, existing business, somebody just with an idea, how do I gain inspiration? And, online reviews. What is the market that you're interested in getting market share in? Read what people are saying about those existing products at the moment. They're incredibly insightful in terms of, what are the trends there? Are there trends which you can take advantage of and address? Again, that opening statement I made, designing problems or providing solutions to problems people ignore. That's where true product differentiation and market share comes from. Customer conversations. Even if you haven't got existing customers, better, easier if you do perhaps, but survey them. Equally get a hold of the people who aren't your customers. I think that sort of feedback is just as, if not more valuable. What are their needs? How are you not meeting their needs? How do you disappoint them currently? It's adopting all of that customer conversation and feedback in an empathetic way to say, yes, there is a need there. How can I, as a business with a product, service that need better? Developing that into personas. So, what are the different types of target customers? What do their lives look like? What do their needs look like? What are the regions and demographics which they live in? And, how does my product essentially go into that market and make sure that I get that market share? How do I provide solutions to those latent needs? And what I mean by latent needs, if you aren't familiar with the term, is, problems which people aren't yet familiar that they have essentially. People aren't aware of what they don't know about, is it? And that's the true amazing innovation that can really drive a product's success. And that's often done through observation. So looking at latent needs and just general mechanistic studies or user-centered study, the ideal scenario of you have a prototype, you have an idea, even talking to a focus group, describe your life, describe how you interact with the type of products which are existing in the market. What's disappointing about them? And, it's learning through that empathetic conversation and developing those latent needs that you really get a true understanding of what the market is and market analysis. How and where and what do you apply all of that to? So, this isn't an exhaustive list. It's just some examples of how you inspire yourself with content of what is existing out there, who to talk to, how to talk to them. But once you've garnered all of that information, what's next? And this is something which I think, yes, this is a messy front end of conversation, content, But I think the key to this is building it, building it into a really logical process of deduction. And what we describe that as is a core functional requirements matrix. And that is something which you can make unique to your product, to your business. What are the key latent needs of my customers that I want to represent? Feasibility, viability, desirability. So I've just called this out in terms of a completely non-specific example, but usability, adjustability, size, complexity, uniqueness. In the cases of Dyson air multiplying technology, air delivery, purification, my BOM or the bill of materials. How many parts does it take to build my design? The DDU, that's otherwise referred to as the delivered duty unpaid. How much it costs for your bill of materials to be put in a packaging box on a ship and arrive in the port of said lead market without paying the import duties, that DDU. How much does it cost you to get your product to your market versus the net present value? I think essentially starting with this in mind to contextualize all of your inspiration and all of your subsequent ideas is crucially important, because what it allows you to do is find out which idea, albeit some might be more desirable, some might be more feasible, but which is the best holistic idea to best service your needs. So you've developed your core functional requirements based off conversation with your market, with your people, understanding what their needs are. What you do with that moving forwards is essentially ideas. You've got your inspiration. Now it's about ideation. How do you create those ideas? Good ideas and solutions do not happen in a vacuum. I think we've all been privy to the experience of sitting at a desk, as I am, as you no doubt are as well. How do I get into this market? What are the needs? I think it's really important just to focus on the fact that true ideas and solutions don't and very often can't happen in a vacuum. Create context and conversation around problem statements often are the true key to solutions or future ideas. So whether or not that's your team, if it's a team you can hire, engaging with a business like Gembah in our marketplace, or if it's just engaging with your users, coming up with new ideas. How do I address the problem statements which I've established to be in my market? And I think there's some really good key guidance around this, ideation, brainstorming. There's lots of terminology which refers to it. But again, in terms of the subsequent resources which will be available to you, IDEO has some really good fundamental ground rules for ideation sessions. Deferred judgment is not about what is the right idea right now. Again, we've started this process with a very clear methodology of what is going to be my standard of what's going to be good and bad. But within the session itself, defer judgment, encourage wild ideas. There's a great example of an engineer who had an idea, or they were ideating around how do we crack walnuts? I need to get walnuts out more efficiently and with better results. In the past, they would try and stamp walnuts, but unsurprisingly, the walnuts come out in a million different pieces at the end of that process. So, and this is a great example, but like in that ideation session with those process engineers, how do we provide a better process to get better walnuts at the end of it? He had a silly idea that he wanted to dismiss, but what he said was, wouldn't it be great if we had tiny little men and we could put them inside the walnuts and they could just like dig outwards and like remove the shell. And that's a crazy, wild idea. But what they ended up with was putting walnuts into a vacuum so that the air inside shells needed to escape out of that vacuum, and it essentially imploded the shell off the walnuts. So it's about encouraging wild, crazy ideas, building on the ideas of others, but at the same time, staying focused on what are the problem statements that we're trying to solve for. One conversation at a time, be visual. It's an incredibly easy, even as I'm trying to articulate this process to you, by providing visual aids, by even if you're not a good drawer, just representing your idea on a piece of paper so that it lasts subsequent to the conversation is incredibly important. And go for quantity. You can never have enough ideas, essentially. Just more ideas, building on the ideas of everybody in the group. But then you might say, okay, well, I have 100 ideas, I have 10 ideas, I have 50 ideas. That's fine. That's perfect. The more ideas, the better. Because what we want to do now is apply that to our core functional requirements matrix. So we say, how might we do that? And I didn't touch on it before, but again, a key usability area of this matrix is you list out what you perceive to be the key things to consider with regards to feasibility, viability, desirability, like the true innovation of a good product there. And in this, I've just weighted out those different requirements. I've listed out 10 there, but and again, in terms of general guidance, I would advise using a scoring system between 1 and 5 to try and help differentiate, albeit not too granular in terms of weighting. And what you want to do is essentially take all of your ideas, at a base level. If you had 100, group them into similar areas, versus if you, in this example, have 10, list out what those 10 ideas are, describe them, and then go down that list of the core functional requirements matrix and score it how it performs against that need for your business. So for usability, if we run down that first example, usability, like pretty good. Like if 5's your best, 1's your worst, making it proportional to whatever that example is, like, yeah, it's pretty usable, but it's not very adjustable. Medium size, could be smaller, could be bigger, like just in the middle, that's good. Although it's pretty complex. So 2 scores badly. It's quite a complicated design in terms of execution. Uniqueness, like this is something which, differentiates itself in a positive way. 4. Air delivery in this example, great. Like one of my key functional areas in terms of like expected performance that my users need, like delivers brilliantly. Purification, not very good. My bill of materials, in terms of complexity, again, you see that my bill of materials, albeit complex, is actually quite, not too many parts. So it scores well, 4. Through to DDU, not too expensive, and I have a good amount of net present value. But you'll see, due to my weightings, it actually becomes very evident when you add up those scores that we have 3 clear winners. And I think this is a really interesting example to go through. And it's not something which provides you example. It doesn't provide you answers immediately, and you end up adjusting that weighting and adjusting the scores. But I think what it really shines a light on is that there are some unexpected winners. And those are the ones that are really surprising and interesting. And this is an iterative process of, taking those ideas and applying them to prototyping and ideating on this further. So I mentioned prototyping, and prototyping isn't something which requires huge investment. Again, I haven't got examples to show you now, but with the simplest of prototype, IDEO, Dyson, Frog, Gembah, there's lots of leading cutting edge technology companies, which the first prototype is made out of paper. The first prototype could be a cardboard box, which you just describe the function of, that you ask somebody to interact with. I think it's about representing your idea accurately and engaging with people to get feedback. That's the key message to take home from this. This is an example as well of that iterative process, gaining feedback. So with the Dyson Supersonic, another product I was involved in, the beginning of the process and how you develop and ideate on that with feedback and with development of the execution in mind. The beginning of the process is quite different from the end, but it's about a commitment to that iterative process of learning and empathy towards both your client and user needs, but also the business needs. That really separates you from competition. So again, just to close that around in terms of making sure that you inspire yourself, provide context and conversation to inform what those user needs are. What are the latent needs? What are the gaps in the market? Inspire yourself, provide, give yourself content around that, ideate on that, turn that into prototypes. And again, like really encouraging you just to look up online resources of how to make a cardboard prototype. It might even just be a conversation, like look at this product on a piece of paper versus this drawing of a product. These are the benefits against both of them. Questionnaires. There's so much around ideation and implementation that are so accessible to everybody. And just, reinforcing that this isn't just a begin and end solution. It's something which you really need to be conscious that is cyclical and interwoven. You can gain inspiration from your implementation. Throughout your ideation, you gain inspiration on like user needs which you haven't yet met. But I think it's just about that real commitment to listening to what people need with that human-centered design approach, and then subsequently applying that to ideation sessions, building that into prototypes, taking that back to your users in a way that endorses and encourages conversation to better inform your design. So that's what I wanted to go through you all in terms of product success through differentiation. As I mentioned, all the content you see there, I've got purposefully from online resources, which you'll be able to look up yourself and engage with. There's a lot of reading material, there's videos, there's books. So a lot of content for you to be able to take away. Great. Thank you, Caroline. Are there any questions?
All right, great. Thanks, Neil. And we can send those resources, links to those resources over after the session. There are several questions. Just a reminder, if you would like to get a question answered while Neil is here, feel free to put those in the Q&A and we will go through them as we get them. So first question, was there ever a customer request problem that you couldn't solve?
Absolutely. I think that there are some problems and some needs which users have, but it's about how close can you get to that. I think it's, sometimes the perfect solution doesn't exist, but, do you provide enough of a benefit that it gets you there? So in terms of, I'm trying to think of a good example. In terms of air delivery, for products, often people have, and again, it's about finding that silver lining in product development. You might have very varying information and feedback from, say, the Americas versus Asia in terms of how people want to interact with your product. But it's about providing benefits and features to those people that they can interact with. Sometimes that isn't, all encompassing, but it provides enough that it positively differentiates you. Sorry if that's a bit vague, but in short, yes, there are some things which you can't address, taking into account particularly that desirability, feasibility, and viability. Sometimes the technology just doesn't exist, or it will take a very long time to develop.
All right, great. Next question. How can you start solving hard problems like these through design when you don't have design or mechanical experience?
That's a great question. And I think as much, I'd almost link that to, I often get asked, I'm not a creative person. How do I create ideas? How do I haven't gotten ideas. And I think, again, I would just really major on that conversation point of inspiration and context. Facilitating for conversation with the people that interact with your product will almost intrinsically, provide you with problem statements. What are your frustrations? What do the products you use today not deliver you? I think that is as important an insight into the product development journey and overall development cycle as any engineering degree would provide you. I think it's about getting that nucleus of a good idea which reflects and responds well to user needs. That's the true key to successful product development. In terms of, and it draws on a good point in terms of insight versus execution. What we've been talking about today is very much focused on the insight perspective. In terms of if you haven't got any engineering capability or experience, like you will need to find product development partners to execute on that idea very successfully. And that's where a company like Gembah perfectly situates entrepreneurs and product developers. But no, in short, you don't need to be an engineer or background. I would just really encourage focusing on conversation and empathetic user needs.
All right, next question is around the product development process. Someone is patent pending and they're ready to go into product development. Is it possible for them to keep all of the IP from this development theirs?
Absolutely. So I think you need to be careful to partner with the right groups. So in terms of NDAs you can have in place, there's a number of different NDA types. And I think what you'd be looking for is, an exclusive NDA where you maintain all of the IP in that process. Not everybody is going to be happy to sign up to that, but absolutely, is it possible to retain all of your IP? Yes, it is possible.
All right. And I think the follow-up to that is that if they're actually filing a patent, are they the one filing the design patent?
So you don't need to file the design patent yourself. Again, as much as design facilitation, there's a lot of IP attorneys. So I think I would really encourage, in terms of not wasting resource, I think it's a really sensible thing to do an IP search of existing IP around certain areas prior to, having a failed attempt yourself, making sure that what you're applying for isn't out there already. I think there's a lot of online resources, and we can maybe add that to the pack, which goes out subsequently in terms of, how and who you should interact with, in terms of, what is the IP landscape, of the existing market versus, where you could potentially get some IP.
All right, great. Moving on to more of the product life cycle, how do you iterate on a product that's already implemented? And how often do you revisit the product to improve on it?
That's a great, so sorry, just repeat it one time, Carolyn, in terms of something which is already implemented, how do you, and then how often?
Yeah, definitely.
I think, businesses need to grow and build continuously. So I would really, for a product which is already existing, it's about that incremental evolution, or, evolutionary incremental design. So you're either adding the potential for more value through margin, or you're adding on more feature sets to get more users. I think that's something which nearly any product line can do continuously. And, that again is having a real clear view of your competitors. What are their offerings? How do you perform against those? And what can you adopt, learning from them, versus also just engaging with your users, like people who are dissatisfied with your product versus people who haven't bought your product. Try and find those people and personas and learn from them. So I think it's a really logical step forward in terms of engaging with people that allows you to iterate on an existing product. I think, the market in terms of the giants provides a good precedent in terms of, the iPhone, Dyson, they're presenting new product developments every year, essentially iterating on a product every year. And the really important thing around that is keeping ahead in terms of not only IP in a defensible position, but it's also about claims. People get very used to things which are familiar. And so how do you differentiate your product from itself? Like self-referential claims, like I am 10% better than I was last year. I'm now 50% better than the competition. So it's really trying to stay ahead of the curve. And I'd encourage, you as a business owner or an entrepreneur, that you should be doing that continuously.
All right, great. We have a question about the process and kind of the steps in that process. And they want to know as you handle product ideas, which might be possible to get an IP, but you're not sure if the idea really works. Do you make the patent first and then develop or find suppliers to share the idea with? Or do you go first the suppliers or the patent first? So really what's the best ideal approach there?
Sure. I think the key thing there is developing the idea to a point where you're confident in it. And I guess it's hard without specifics, but I think there are concurrent activities to a degree. Again, in the scenario where you can develop a product through a development house, as well as engaging with suppliers, you can get NDAs in place, which allow you to retain all of the IP. So I'd really encourage really pushing forward with the product development lifecycle and journey, making sure that you get to market. But, whilst you're doing that from the early ideation phase through to, you know, something which is executable and you can take to a manufacturer. Kind of be considering IP along that whole journey. I think you'll reach a critical mass in terms of the engineering detail of your design that you can actually accurately represent it in a patent. I think that's a key point to get to. Yes, but you can do the two concurrently.
Great. Next question is there a way to put a value on this process or on the problem that someone is solving for?
That's a great question. I think yes is the answer. Again, we haven't touched on it in any great detail right now, but I mentioned, and I had NPV, net present value, at the bottom of the core functional requirements list. And what that speaks to is, you know, with insight into markets, with insight into volumes which are existing in an existing area, like having a real target to, you know, what and where is that product spread of, like, either function or value. Like, how many functions does the product have versus how much are they charging for it? And where's the sweet spot that you can place, like intentionally place your product? So I think having a clear view to how you're going to differentiate your product, like what are the features you're bringing online versus what that potential market value and segment in terms of volume that you can aim to penetrate and claim as your own. Absolutely, there are tools out there that can do it. You know, again, Gembah and the like, you know, having capability with our expert network of people who can provide that sort of insight. In short, can you ascertain the value of a potential feature set? I'd say that yes, you can.
All right, great. Next question is, how large is the project development team and how long does a project take for a company like Dyson? I know there's some things that you can't talk about, but maybe more in generalities.
I think this again, I would lean back on my encouragement to everybody in terms of that process of, you know, it's really great when you have a new idea and you're filled with hope and excitement. You know, you engage with people, you build prototypes, and that general curve of happiness typically trends down because it's a hard learning experience versus up the other side where you've incorporated all of that learning into confidence. You know, that is a process which every business goes through. And likewise with a company like Dyson, and we're talking about that net present value in the question before, you know, they invest massively in terms of capability because, you know, for every one product launch you see a year for a company like Dyson and Apple and Google, there's 100 behind it in that same fiscal year which haven't made it to the shelf because of those key metrics in terms of that core functional requirements list. You know, what is delivering me the best net present value for a product? So, and I've lost my train of thought. I can't remember the original question.
Just the size of product development team.
The size of product development team, yes. So at Dyson, as an example, when I left, we had an R&D staff of nearly 5,000 strong, and just in terms of R&D. You know, you then dive, you know, you go to look at the broader business. I think Dyson's currently at, you know, large numbers. I think up towards, I think if you look on LinkedIn, I think it's between 20 and 50,000 people globally. So in terms of the facilities, the resources, the people that big business applies to this, it's huge.
All right, great. Next question. It's more about a specific industry, but we can relate it to everyone here. In an industry where there's not a lot of innovation, usually private labeling, branding, how would you approach product differentiation in a situation like that? Is there a specific approach there?
Sure. I think even in a white labeling scenario, you're wanting to positively differentiate yourself from the competition. So I think, again, I mentioned that map of the market analysis, like what does that spread look like? I think trying to muscle your way into, or, you know, finding a sweet spot where a lot of people aren't operating, and claims as well, like what sort of, albeit white labeling, like how can you differentiate yourself, albeit visually, through claims or through some sort of perceived functional benefit that, you know, others don't have. So yes, in terms of, you know, product differentiation for success in a white labeling scenario, it is harder But I think it's just, you need to invest far more heavily in a really accurate view of the market. What is the market spread, and what am I very in a targeted view going to try and get for myself?
Okay, great. All right. In your experience, how effective are design patents at keeping your competitors at bay? He says it's a very general question, but
and it's a great question, and I think it really links into me focusing on the fact that businesses need to iterate and keep moving forward, because in short, I think there's a certain grace period where design patents are important, and I would encourage everyone to get them, because I think what it does is really demonstrates true uniqueness and value as an IP owner. But in terms of fending off competition, I think depending on the resources available, you need a lot of a design patent is essentially the ability, it wards off people, like it warns them off, but it doesn't stop them from infringing on that IP. And if you haven't got large funds available to then chase them in the courts, which can be years in the process, essentially it's quite hard for them not to take margin share, or like essentially steal your IP. So I guess that's why I would always encourage for businesses, if you have a new product which you've just launched, you should be already working on and thinking about what comes behind it. That's the way that you can, number one, demonstrate and talk to your client for that year period where your competition is trying to copy your IP and get to market. You are the leader there. You've got a real narrative you can take advantage of. But once they've then copied your idea, and again, yes, you can take them to court and stop them, but there's a lot of money and time. When they've got there, you're already ahead of the curve again, the year following or the 6 months following, however quickly you can do it in terms of the next thing. So I think, in short, it's very hard to defend IP, particularly, from the Asia sector. Like, they very brazenly copy ideas, and it's very hard to chase that down. But I think what IP does is it does, in some cases, or in most cases, what it does is really demonstrate value added, which people really do value.
all right. Next question, and we're getting to the end of the list here for everyone that's on. Essentially, how do you find users that are willing to give you feedback on your ideas? So how can you get a network of volunteers or other people that are willing to give you kind of brutal or honest feedback?
Sure. I think you can do this on a few different levels. Like, at a grassroots level, if you haven't got a lot of capital behind you, there's Facebook groups. Like, there must be like an interest area Facebook group for nearly everything under the sun. I feel like, find the people who are engaged and interested in your product area, and just engage with them, talk to them, just be open to conversation and try and initiate that conversation. If that's not possible, find and read reviews. That's, in some cases, really does inform, finding out what frustrations people have. Versus if you have got capital, there's a lot of human factors research companies or mechanistic companies who can, conduct, very structured, qualitative, quantitative studies through questionnaires and, engaging with people, focus groups. So I think depending on where you are in terms of your ability and funds, I think you can find the people that you're looking to talk to.
Okay. Next question, any tips on showcasing innovation when you're selling via e-commerce? A lot of times, like Amazon and other platforms, you're limited to a single image and a title. Are there any other things that you can do there?
I think taking advantage of your story and like trying to harness, social media, online content, how are you positively differentiating from your competition? So yes, in the e-commerce area where you haven't got that much space on the page to show the product itself, but like, where are you driving traffic to that website from? How can you take advantage of those examples on the page? Just make them as best as they can. I think also just intuitively take lead from market leading products. Have a look at how Apple does it. Have a look at how Dyson does it. It's about, again, calling out the specific benefits of your product. And I think if you do that well through the core functional requirements matrix, or just understanding how and why people interact with and use your product, like making sure you take advantage of that knowledge through the imagery you use as well, so that people intuitively relate to your product.
Agreed. Imagery is critical, and there's also resources like you mentioned, social, where they can get some help from friends and other people to promote their product. We've seen some success with other people that we worked with that do that. All right. So last question. Online has become the major driver of sales with only a few pictures displaying the product. How does this affect design? How could you potentially stand out through design when you're showcasing a product?
Sure. I think showcasing is one thing, but differentiation comes through in a lot of different ways as well. So like we've just mentioned, social media, YouTube, blogs, like finding your audience. I think it's not just about how you represent your idea on the page that sells it to the person. Ideally, somebody's being driven to that web page via some sort of informative video conversation. I think having a broader view of content, as well as claims, self-referential, like competition, like how do you positively differentiate yourself from the competition through your marketing claims. So it's as much about your words, like on the page and descriptions, as it is about the imagery that you use. And I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. So minimal space on the page does not cost you in design. I think what people are there to get is benefit, whether or not you communicate that benefit through the picture or through the content of your claims and how you describe your product. I think all of that is delivered through successful product innovation.
All right. We actually got 3 questions in while you're answering that one. So I know we're coming up at the hour. I will give you a choice on what you want to be able to answer here. One is about
try and get all 3.
Yeah, we can try.
I'll speed up my answers.
Do you believe that product differentiation is actually the core of brand differentiation?
Yes, I think true brand is driven by value. Like how do you inform brand value through your products, essentially? So I think the two are intrinsically linked. And if you have incredibly strong product, I think that supports and bolsters brand. Absolutely. I don't think you can have a true meaningful premium brand if your product and your benefits aren't there to support it. I think it's far more the other way around, like providing true benefit through product development, which then supports and builds brand.
Got it. Lightning round. Who inspires you as a designer? And can you expand on how you pivot to new trends, culture, and demographics as they evolve?
Sure. I guess in terms of who inspires me as a designer, people who are very multidisciplinary really inspire me. So people like Ron Arad, Mark Newson. I think in the context or the conversation of design, for me, architecture is the mother of all design. So often it's really famous architects, because it's the content of buildings that then provide the placement of all of today's products in a lot of cases. So I think a good example of that would be Mies van der Rohe, who designed the Barcelona stand in the early 60s. I think he was the true first expression of minimal design. If you aren't familiar with it, look it up. It's a great story and certainly a real source of inspiration for me.
All right. Last question. Are focus groups useful and reliable for testing a new product?
Absolutely. Again, providing context and conversation really helps hone how things relate to people and people's response to your idea. I think there's a lot of different mediums, and the more you can put into those conversations with regards to representing your idea accurately, I think that is where it really, that's where the real value is. I think the thing you need to be careful of is making sure that those focus groups are your target audience, the right demographic. If you're designing a solution for Asia or China or Australia, who have very different lifestyles versus, say, America or Europe, like making sure that you're talking to the right people. And I think, with the world the way it is, and us engaging right now through an online webinar, like people are accessible. You can get a hold of the right people. So I'd really encourage that focus groups and conversation are a huge part of successful product development, and just find your right people and right audience to talk to.
All right. Well, you've got through the lightning round. We are at the top of the hour. Thanks everyone for attending the session today. Really appreciate you hanging in there if you did for all the Q&A. We do have a couple more sessions with Neil scheduled in the next couple of months. So if this topic was of interest to you, we have some others that he's going to speak on. So again, appreciate all your time, and look out for an email with those resources that we promise. Thank you.
Thank you.